Hello, everybody, and welcome to another edition of our weekly market update video. This is our Southern California housing market update for March 9th, 2021. My name is Stephen Mead. I'm the managing broker and founder here at Domicile Real Estate. Again, just as a reminder, our stats are based on Los Angeles and Orange counties. If you do have a specific scenario for us in one of those surrounding counties, like, say, Riverside, San Bernardino, San Diego, definitely hit us up about that individually, and we will try to get back to you. The title here is not clickbait. I do think we're seeing kind of some of the fundamental changes, and I'm going to go through our stats like normal, and then at the end, I'm going to talk about and walk you through some of the potential outcomes. I think a lot of times people in this space want to give you these ironclad predictions of what is going to happen. I try really hard not to do that. I think it's smarter to really look at the potential ways things could change and how that may affect decisions that you make today. And you can look at what is the likelihood of those changes in whatever direction and how that might affect you or eliminate opportunities or create new opportunities for you, depending on whether you're a buyer or seller, kind of like what your personal situation is. So I'm going to go through that at the end because I think it's really important to sort of walk through some of these changes that we are starting to see in this market. So without further ado, we're going to go ahead and we are going to load up our statistics. Let me get on our screen share here and kind of talk about what's going on. So this first slide is our total active listings. This is meant to be really simple. This is since the beginning of the year. And I think what to me is just absolutely sort of gobsmacking about this chart, to kind of use a new superlative, is just how little this has changed, right, since the beginning of the year. I mean, we are approaching 2.5 months into the new year. So we're approaching 2.5 months in, and if you look at this, what's remarkable is how little these numbers have changed. Just to see this active listing number just hover, basically. In fact, it actually went down a little bit. It's rebounded slightly in our $1 to $2 million category, but I mean, it's pretty flat here for under $1 million. And when you look, what's fascinating is go back to the beginning of the year and look at how little it has changed since the beginning of the year. And same here for our $1 to $2 million. I mean, this is truly remarkable, and I don't think I've seen anything like it. And I think it just shows you that this system, and when I say system, I mean kind of all these things and factors that are affecting one another in our market seem to conspire to produce very small changes in inventory. Despite fundamental data changing significantly, this active listing number just doesn't seem to be changing very much. Now, if we're talking about this, let's break down this total active listings. How do we get to total active listings, right? Well, we get to it by looking at, well, what new listings came in the market and what listings were taken away from us, right? Because they went into escrow. So if we look here, we see our new active listings. I think this is really encouraging news, right? This is new listings over the last 14 days. And, this is really great news for these entry-level price ranges. I mean, look at the jump that we are seeing. I mean, this is hundreds more new listings, right, are coming up over the past few weeks than there have been in the past. I mean, this chart is heading in the right direction. You'll notice our luxury $1 to $2 million market, that feels a little lazier, but even that's showing a pretty decent little bit of an uptick in new listings. It's springtime. We are into March. I think a lot of people are talking about putting their homes in the market. I still think, these results are way less than we would expect. And I have a little bit of a theory, and I want to talk to you about that at the end, about what I think is really going on sort of under the hood together with some of these statistics we're going to see. So if our 14-day new listings are supply, that's great. Supply is heading up. But if we look here on our 14-day new escrows, I think that's kind of where we see a little bit of, not the issue. I mean, I think we have some very subtly encouraging news coming out. So our 14-day new escrows for our $1 to $2 million category, these haven't gone up. They're still rising, but they haven't really gone up by nearly as much as the new listings. That's great news. If you look here up in our under $1 million category, we actually see things really kind of leveling off. And this isn't terribly unusual, even in other years. We will see that buyers seem to return to the market in a new year a lot more quickly than sellers do. The sellers almost always trail behind. But I think a lot of what might be happening here, and I'll talk about this again at the end, is we've seen rates rise pretty dramatically. And what group of people are affected most by that, right? It's going to be those first-time home buyers. They're almost all in this under $1 million tier. So if you think the most vulnerable group to rate increases, yeah, their demand hasn't really fallen very much. It's just leveled off. Now, if you look at our absorption rate, I think this really tells the story of sort of reconciling these two together. We are seeing our absorption rate fall a bit. And one of the metrics that I have frequently used when I talk about the statistic is anything over 80% is a very, very strong seller's market. And anything over 90% is a hyper competitive seller's market. And anything over 100 is just plain nuts. Well, we are in these sort of, I would say we're kind of in that high 80s for our under 1 million. We are right around 80 for our 1 to 2 million. These are still incredibly strong numbers. But I think when you look at this graph and you see it tilting down, guess what? The last week was a better week for buyers. It is easier for buyers than it was 2 weeks ago. So if you're a buyer in this marketplace, this is great news. If you're a seller, things are still very good for you, but understand the longer you wait, the more at risk I think you are of things changing. So here's our closed prices, right? And one of the things that we saw was last week they jumped a bit. Things are a little bit more tempered this week, still rising prices. And remember, these closed prices are based on data that was from 30 to 45 days ago. These were the contracts that were negotiated a month ago or more. So if you remember that, think of where the market was a month ago. It was towards the beginning, first half of February. Things were still very much nuts. I do expect to see these kind of temper out and level off a bit. That's my expectation, right? And if you look versus where we were at the beginning of the year, I mean, we've seen big price increases since the beginning of the year in all of our categories. You felt it, I felt it, and the data shows it. I do think we're going to see these level out a little bit when we see that graph of sort of this softening absorption rate. That is really where you start to see the prices level out a bit, or at least decrease their rise. So this is a statistic that we've been looking at for a while. And we added this one this year, and this is sort of another measure of absorption. And this is our percent still active after 14 days. So we take a look back at all the listings that came on the market in the last 14 days in these categories, and we say how many of them are still active. If you look here, under 1 million, fascinatingly, this is completely leveled off. Hopefully we'll see this rise a little bit, maybe. What's interesting is you actually see this $1 to $2 million market almost looks like it's tightening slightly. And if you go back to those new escrows, you actually see that as well. I'm gonna jump back here to show that the data is consistent, right? If we look at new escrows, boom, this number has gone up here. And we actually see that in our percent still active, it is dropping, meaning that $1 to $2 million market is probably a little bit more competitive than it was last week, whereas our under $1 million market is showing pretty level, maybe even a little bit better this week than it was last week. If you look at our list to close ratio, we're going to have to edit our graph here. We are seeing this number accelerating beyond 102% and also accelerating back up there again for our 1 to 2 million. Remember, this is looking back to deals that were negotiated 30 to 45 days ago, because this is based on closed sale data. So, I do give these graphs, but I want to caution you that, remember, this is the way it was, not necessarily the way it is. This is good at looking back at where we were. This is our days on market statistic. We saw a rise in our 1 to 2 million a week ago, and now that number has fallen again, but we are still at extremely low numbers. I mean, look at where these graphs are. I don't want anyone to mistake when I say things might be a little better for you. That doesn't mean that they are easy in that first time buyer category in these entry level properties. It doesn't mean it's easy. It just may mean it's slightly easier than it was a week or two ago. If you look here on our 1 to 2 million, this has really seen a precipitous drop. And what I find really fascinating about this chart is if you compare, right, where things were, if you compare for our luxury 1 to 2 and our more entry level under $1 million markets, if you look at this, there's a pretty big spread here towards the end of last year. But look at how close these categories have narrowed together. That's really interesting to me. I haven't really had a chance to think about why I think that's occurring. I'm kind of curious to see, the $1 to $2 million market has typically had much longer marketing times. And just look at that. I mean, look at how far that has dropped. And to get so close, I mean, it is only like maybe a week different than that number for under $1 million. Now, this is the final graph, and I think this is really the one that's going to hit home. And I'm going to go off screen share just for a second because I want to make a point. Someone, and actually this person knows who they are on YouTube, has commented about, and I'll answer you, Jason, actually in a comment, but you made a mention that if interest rates are going up, and they have been going up, we are basically, roughly 0.4 to almost a half percentage point higher than our low point. If you look at interest rates going up, Jason made the comment, are they really going up, or are they just reflecting some inflationary pressures, and the real interest rate, or the interest rate minus inflation, has actually not changed very much? Well, I've got two opinions on that. Opinion number one is that, most importantly, I think that is a distinction without a difference. And what I mean by that is, yes, that may be what is happening, but it doesn't matter. And the reason why it doesn't matter is because the only number that matters to consumers, especially in a short period of time, is the amount of that actual payment for housing. So I'm going to jump back into this graph and indicate why this is kind of a big deal to see these numbers going in this direction. So let me go back in here into our screen share. So if you look at where we were back in, let me get a little pointer here. If you look at where we were back in July of 2018, that's our baseline number here for the payment on a median priced home. And we looked through 2019, affordability got better. Through 2020, it went up, but the reality is, we finished 2020 with homes being significantly, or a decent amount at least, more affordable than they were in 2018. I think that's great news. But now, if you take a look at what has happened really since the beginning of the year. We've really seen these payments start ratcheting up, and we are now at a point where we actually are, it looks like about 108%. So we are 8% higher than we were in 2018, in the middle of 2018. Well, there's a couple comments there. Number one, this is obviously a change in the market, and I will dive into that in a second. But the other thing to point out is we really haven't seen things rise to this degree. And this is a function of two things, right? Affordability is really determined by two major factors. Number one, what are interest rates? Number two, what are median prices? Those are the things that affect the statistic. Both of those have been rising. Now, if you go and you take a look at this and you say 108%, we are almost 3 years since this 100%. So you could make an argue that based on inflation, which hopefully includes some wage growth, that means that really we're at 2018 prices. I do think it's unfortunate because previously we were at, below 2018 prices by a lot. And we've seen how much things have risen, in the last couple of months. So now we're going to talk about the fun part, and that is, what does this mean for you? And I'm going to divide this conversation into two parts. This is our whole market analysis, which means we are speaking to both buyers and sellers. So I'm going to divide this kind of analysis into two parts. if you are a buyer, right, you might be thinking of how you think the next couple months are going to play out. I do think we are going to see strong GDP growth in the economy. I do think that is going to push on inflation. In fact, the chairman of the Federal Reserve last week said they expect to see some inflation in the summer, right? So, we have multiple sources telling us that this is coming a little sooner than we thought. I think there's kind of a frame of mind if you're a buyer, right? Like there's really two main pathways you're thinking this could go, right? Two different ways it could go. Way number one is that what could happen is that this is going to sort of reduce demand for housing. And this week we saw a little bit of evidence of that. That buyer demand looks to have leveled a little bit. Though I don't think 1 week really we can draw a conclusion there. But that buyer demand is going to drop, and that you may even see a little bit of price relief to bring these prices down, especially if rates continue to go up. And that's one possible outcome, right? And if that happens, you're thinking, well, maybe I should wait. And there's a couple of issues with that analysis. And issue number one is that even minor price relief does not make up for the difference in interest rates. It doesn't. It'll increase. Believe it or not, and this sounds very counterintuitive, interest rates have a lot more to do with your payment than the price of the house. And it's important to understand that trend. So it means you may be in a position where if you follow that course of action, even if prices drop 5%, we'll say, your payment is still going to be higher and you can afford less. So I don't know if that's really winning, right, if you're a buyer. The second way that this can go is that we see these rates rise up. It has a little bit of an effect on demand, but the bigger effect may actually be on supply. And this is kind of sort of what I'm thinking of, right? Is I think of if you're an entry level home buyer, this means in Orange County, LA County, you're probably looking somewhere in the 650 to 750 range, we'll say, as a starter home price. If you are a buyer in those categories, who are the people putting the houses on the market? There are really two groups of people that are putting these entry level homes on the market. Group number one, these are people that are move up buyers, right? They are going to sell their entry level home and they're going to buy a larger, more expensive home. If rates rise, those people, you will see way fewer of those people putting their homes on the market. The second group of people are the people that are selling and moving out of state, right? And we've heard a lot about this in the news. I think it's overstated a little bit, but they face the same problem, right? If you own a home in California, an expensive home, right? Let's say it's worth $700,000, and you are thinking, wow, I'm going to get to move to, we'll say, Nashville, Tennessee, and I'm going to buy a mansion for $500,000. Well, if interest rates rise and you have refinanced your existing home at 2.5%, that affordable home in Nashville at $500,000 is not going to seem nearly as affordable to you. And this will reduce the number of people moving. So my worry is that interest rates may not only affect demand, but they may also affect supply of housing. And I think that's the other side of the equation that people really aren't thinking about when they're kind of doing some of their analyses. So, if you're a buyer, I think, your default position may be, oh, the market's changing, I need to wait and see. I think there is a risk associated with that sort of wait and see approach. And I personally think there's more downside risk at being worse off than there is, the risk that you'll actually have a gain if you wait. So now let's move on to sellers, right? We've been in a market where I think you could have an outhouse, and if the location was decent and you put a sign in the ground, you will get multiple offers. I don't know exactly how long that situation will exist, right? And you face a lot of the same things as a buyer, but you face the opposite situation, right? Prices may fall, and unfortunately for you, that may actually be a situation where you are worse off by a lot, because even what you're buying, even if the price of what you're buying falls a little bit, which would be good for you, if interest rates move, that move up opportunity is no longer makes a lot of sense to you. So that means you may be one of those sellers I just talked about who says, oh, this no longer makes sense to us. We wanted to buy a bigger house, but now the price jump, and I'm not talking about the price of the house, I'm talking about your payment. Your payment jump may now be out of reach or to the point where it's not worth it anymore. In the long run, maybe inflation will add to your salary and it'll make up for that difference. Maybe. I don't know. To talk about, that comment we had on, do I think the interest rate increases are just reflecting inflation? Or do I think those are actual rate increases? I think it's both. I think that one component of these rate increases is in fact just that if inflation is moving, the interest rate has to go up just to really be the same relative to inflation. Hope I didn't lose anybody there. If I did, feel free to reach out. But I think the second part is the economy is actually getting stronger. I think people are feeling more confident about that future, and that's pushing interest rates higher. So, just to cap it off, if you're a buyer, wait and see might seem like the safe bet. I don't think it is. This could go a variety of ways. I think it has to go very, very, very badly for you to be better off by waiting. The second part is if you're a seller, it's the same thing. I think this may push you into a position where you can no longer make the change that you were thinking about making, whether that's moving up to a larger home or whether that's moving out of the area. Both of those options may suddenly be more expensive to you than they are today, even if the price of what you want to buy ends up going down. Anyhow, thank you guys so much for watching. These are a lot of fun to do. We love making them. Questions, comments, we love them. Also, if there's anything we can help you with, if you need any assistance with real estate in Los Angeles and Orange counties, definitely reach out to us. We are here for you. And in fact, if you actually need assistance in another California county, we can direct you to agents in those areas that actually think like us. So if you like what we do, we have some referrals that we can make to you as well. So don't forget to like, subscribe, hit that notification bell, and we will see you later on this week for our first time home buyer market update.